The Haunted Mirror. There once was a beautiful mirror that stood in the grand hall of an old mansion. The mirror was so exquisite that it was said to have been a gift from a prince to the previous owner of the mansion. It was made of the finest crystal, and had an ornate golden frame that shone brightly in the sunlight. The mirror was so perfect that it reflected the beauty of everything that stood before it. But little did anyone know, the mirror had a dark secret. One night, a young woman named Alice came to visit the mansion. She was a beautiful young woman with long, flowing hair and piercing green eyes. As soon as she laid eyes on the mirror, she was mesmerized by its beauty. She stood in front of the mirror and admired her own reflection, but something about the mirror seemed to make her uneasy. She tried to shake off the feeling and walked away, but the mirror seemed to follow her every move. That night, as Alice lay in bed, she heard strange noises coming from the hall. She got up and went to investigate, but she couldn't see anything unusual. As she turned to go back to bed, she caught a glimpse of her own reflection in the mirror. But this time, something was different. Her reflection wasn't quite right. It seemed to be distorted and twisted, and her eyes glowed with a strange light. Alice tried to look away, but she couldn't. She was transfixed by the mirror. Suddenly, her reflection reached out of the mirror and grabbed her arm. Alice screamed in terror and tried to pull away, but her reflection was too strong. It pulled her closer and closer to the mirror, and before she knew it, Alice was sucked into the mirror. The next morning, the owner of the mansion found Alice's lifeless body lying on the floor in front of the mirror. He was horrified and immediately called the police. But when the police arrived, they couldn't find any evidence of foul play. The mirror seemed to be just a normal mirror, and there was no indication of how Alice had died. Over the years, many more people came to visit the mansion and admire the beautiful mirror. But one by one, they all met the same gruesome fate as Alice. Some were sucked into the mirror, while others were driven to madness, and eventually died from mysterious illnesses. The owner of the mansion tried to get rid of the mirror, but it seemed to be impossible. Every time he tried to sell it or give it away, it would always end up back in the grand hall, as if it were meant to stay there forever. The mirror became known as the Haunted Mirror, and people would come from all over just to catch a glimpse of it. But nobody dared to touch it or even get too close to it. It was said that the mirror had a life of its own, and that it would consume anyone who dared to look into it for too long. One day, a group of paranormal investigators came to the mansion to investigate the Haunted Mirror. They brought with them all sorts of equipment, including cameras, audio recorders, and EMF detectors. They set up their equipment in the grand hall and began their investigation. At first, everything seemed to be normal, but as the investigators began to ask questions, strange things started to happen. The EMF detector started to beep wildly, and the cameras picked up strange orbs of light floating around the mirror. The investigators knew that they were onto something, but they didn't know what. As they continued their investigation, the mirror suddenly began to shake violently. The investigators tried to get away, but they were too slow. The mirror shattered into a million pieces, and a thick, black fog started to pour out of it. The investigators ran for their lives, but they soon realized that the fog was following them. They could feel its icy touch on their skin, and they could hear whispers in their ears. They tried to run faster, but the fog seemed to be gaining on them. Suddenly, one of the investigators fell to the ground, clutching his chest. He was gasping for air, and his eyes were bulging out of their sockets. The other investigators tried to help him, but it was too late. He died right there on the spot, with a look of sheer terror frozen on his face. The other investigators were horrified, but they knew that they had to keep moving. They ran down the hall and up the stairs, hoping to find a way out. But the fog was relentless, and it seemed to be getting thicker and thicker. As they reached the top of the stairs, the investigators saw something that made their blood run cold. In front of them was a figure, shrouded in the black fog. They couldn't see its face, but they could feel its malevolent presence. The figure started to move towards them, and the investigators knew that they had to do something. They pulled out their cameras and started taking pictures, hoping to capture some evidence of what was happening. As they snapped away, the figure suddenly disappeared, and the fog started to clear. The investigators were left standing there, shaking and terrified. They knew that they had just witnessed something truly horrifying. The next day, The owner of the mansion arrived to find the haunted mirror shattered into a million pieces. He was relieved that the mirror was finally gone, but he couldn't shake the feeling that something terrible had happened. As he walked through the mansion, he couldn't help but feel that he was being watched. He could hear whispers in the halls, and he could feel a chill in the air. He knew that the haunted mirror was still with him even though it was gone. Years later, the mansion was sold to a new owner. But even though the haunted mirror was gone, the legend lived on. People still talked about the mirror and the strange events that had taken place in the mansion. Some even claimed that they could still hear the whispers and feel the chill in the air. And so the haunted mirror remained a dark and twisted part of the mansion's history, haunting those who dared to enter its halls. It was a reminder that sometimes, the most beautiful things can also be the most dangerous, and that sometimes, it's better to leave well enough alone.